Hi everybody. We just watched two quick examples of what I'm calling the maximalist style of visual aids. Rivas, the poet on tropes and themes of 4 a.m. in our pop culture, and then the researcher Hans Rosling talking about population growth and problems in poverty and population growth over the past century. Each of these, to me, is a good example of maximalist style. The first one, Rivas, it's a total performance. It's a complete choreographed, timed performance where his speech is timed alongside the use of songs or audio and also the use of interactive, moving, self-referencing kinds of visuals. And so if you ask yourself, what would this speech look like without any of the audio or any of the video? It wouldn't make a ton of sense because the speaker himself is reliant on the audience turning their attention towards the things that are not his words, that are not him, that are in fact the additions that he's brought into the speech. And so it is not like he is just the star because the audio and the visual are indispensable to his choreographed performance. The second one is perhaps an even better example because I think it's a more typical research-based public speech, a little bit more akin to what we're doing in this class. But it's also a more interesting example because it's almost as if Hans Rosling looked up the public speaking textbook advice that we covered earlier in this lecture and then sought out to create visual aids that would violate every single one of those rules and yet be successful at the same time. So I think Hans Rosling and any other example you can think of along these same lines where there's this kind of dazzling graphical visual display are proof that it's not one size fit all when it comes to visual aid advice. Here's Hans Rosling. He has every single country on earth visualized on a graphical display on an XY axis. He's got the population of that country symbolized by the size of circles on that XY axis. And then he's got them moving as the centuries progressing and then expanding and contracting in the size of the circles against other circles all the while. So to say that this is an incredibly busy slide is perhaps the understatement of the century. As a matter of fact, he's also in error, so says the public speaking textbooks, because he's reading directly from the slides, which you shouldn't do. You should augment the slides with what you're saying, not read directly off of them because audiences can read. But he's also turned his back completely to the audience. He's now speaking directly to the visual aid. His voice is harder to hear because he's not projecting it at the audience. And he's even draped himself on the visual aid itself. But because to me this is a maximalist style, it is kind of exempt from those usual rules of keep it big, keep it simple, don't make it confusing, don't speak to the visual aid, because Hans Rosling isn't the star of this performance anymore. He has ceded stardom to the dazzling visual aid that he has created. And so, to put a fine point on it, I think that you have to think very carefully about how to use the maximalist style if you're going to devote the time to do it. Because while it can be a unique way to engage an audience, it can also be incredibly distracting if the audience isn't catching the information. The rules about the typical rules that we've talked about already in public speaking textbooks and again in this lecture about how to use visual aids if you're adopting a kind of minimalist style, I think that those rules are good rules provided you're adopting a minimalist style, but there are exceptions, and that's what I hope that these two examples exemplified for you.